webinar this evening on questioning the death penalty. I'd like to welcome everybody who is joining this evening on this video series on questioning the death penalty. And I'd like to go ahead and get started with prayer. Let's be in an attitude of prayer. Loving and merciful God, we ask for your presence with us this evening as we begin our journey of questioning the death penalty. We ask you to guide us on how to show compassion and mercy to everyone involved in or affected by the death penalty, and show us the way to honoring and valuing the lives of all persons. Open our hearts and our minds as we listen, and give us wisdom, compassion, and respect as we speak. We ask us all in Jesus' name. Amen. So thank you again for being here this evening. I want to give some introductions to those of us who are involved in putting on this webinar. My name is Paul Bullis. I'm a member of Crossroads United Methodist Church in Phoenix, and I am chair of the Desert Southwest Conference Prison Reform Task Force. And we have some other members of the Prison Reform Task Force with us this evening. Jim Eck and Patty Eck and Sabrina Ayers-Fisher are all members of the task force. In addition, Billy Fidlin is the Director of Justice and Outreach for the Desert Southwest Conference, and she inspires and guides us as well on the task force. This is a five-week series on questioning the death penalty. And we're going to have videos and discussions based on a DVD series by Sister Helen Craijon, who is one of the world's leading authorities and critics of state-sponsored executions. Now, the timing of putting on this series is appropriate because, as you may have seen, the state of Arizona is scheduled to execute Clarence Dixon on May 11th, just 2 weeks from yesterday, which will be the first execution in this state since 2014. Mr. Dixon was convicted of killing Deanna Lynn Bowden in 1978. There are currently 110 men and 3 women on death row in Arizona. Approximately 20 of those people have exhausted all of their appeals so that they could be subject to execution at any time. Now, the process in Arizona is that for initiating an execution is that the Arizona Attorney General asks the Arizona Supreme Court to issue an execution warrant for an individual, which will set the date for the execution. The Arizona Attorney General has requested execution warrants for 2 individuals, Clarence Dixon and Frank Atwood. The Supreme Court has issued the execution warrant for Mr. Dixon, but has not yet granted the execution warrant for Mr. Atwood. So they said the execution for Mr. Dixon is scheduled for May 11th, 2 weeks from yesterday. The Arizona, once the execution warrant is issued by the Arizona Supreme Court, at that point, Mr. Dixon has the opportunity to seek a clemency review or ask for mercy, ask for commutation of his sentence. And the way that process works is he seeks a clemency review by the Arizona Board of Executive Clemency. Well, he made that, Mr. Dixon made that application to the Arizona Board of Executive Clemency. The Arizona, our Prison Reform Task Force submitted a letter of public comment on behalf of Mr. Dixon. The Arizona Board of Executive Clemency met today, and they denied the request for clemency by Mr. Dixon. If that had been granted, the Board of Executive Clemency would have made a recommendation to the governor of Arizona, Governor Ducey, to issue clemency or to commute the sentence of Mr. Dixon. They did not do that. They did not make that recommendation to the governor. Under Arizona law, the governor, in order to be able to issue a pardon or commute a sentence, needs to have that recommendation from the Arizona Board of Executive Clemency. But the governor of Arizona still is the chief executive of the state of Arizona. The Arizona Department of Corrections still is part of the executive branch of the government, and the director works for the governor of Arizona. So the governor of Arizona still may have some power to stop this execution if it is his wish to do so. So we do want to encourage everybody to, if it's on your heart, to call the governor in protest of these executions. The one that's been scheduled for Mr. Dixon, and any ones that may come down the path. For example, Mr. Atwood, the request is still in front of the Supreme Court. The phone number for the governor has been posted in the chat box on this video, on this webinar, and you can see it there. Billy placed it there. There's a phone number for you to call to protest these executions. At the very least, we want to make sure that the governor understands that that there is a public outcry against executions, and it's something that that people are opposed to. In addition, there is going to be a vigil, or there's a vigil scheduled regarding this event, regarding the death penalty, scheduled for May 10th at 6:00 p.m. at the Arizona State Capitol, which is at 1700 West Washington, Phoenix. The prayer vigil is entitled Life on Death Row. And there's more information about that on the Arizona Faith Network website, as well as ACLU Arizona. There are links on the conference website as well on how to get more information. We've put out a fact sheet on the conference website that includes a bunch of additional facts that I'll be talking to you about in just a minute. And one of the items that it has on that fact sheet is links to information about the vigil on May 10th at 6:00 at the state capitol, links on information, as well as how to register for that. That fact sheet, as I said, it's posted on the conference website where you found out information about this webinar, and it's linked there on that website. In addition, you all should have received a reminder email about an hour before this event tonight. In that email, there's also a link to that fact sheet. So you can find out more information about that vigil that's coming up on May 10th, which is just 2 weeks away. One thing I want to mention about tonight's webinar is that it is being recorded. So the fact that you are here and participating, if you have your camera on, and if you participate, you are agreeing that your image and things you say can be used and posted by the conference and possibly used for issues on prison reform, death penalty in the future. So just a reminder, we are being recorded and this will be posted. Also want to remind you that during the course of tonight's session and the sessions in the future, we'll be having an opportunity to discuss with each other views of the death penalty and other issues. And just a reminder that this is a safe zone. This event is a safe zone, and we're asking that everyone be respectful of different opinions and different views that others express. So please keep that in mind during any discussions. This is, as I said, this is a 5-week video series, and we're very glad that you're here this evening. And hopefully you can make all the events, that are coming up, all the sessions. If you can't, that's all right. If you miss one, that's okay. You can come to the next one and the next one. If there's somebody you know who is interested in this, video series, and they still want to participate. They can register the same way you registered. Go to the conference website, look on the conference calendar for any of these dates, and follow that link and register that way. Doesn't matter if they haven't registered now, they can register at any time and participate at any time. But one thing I want to mention especially is, if you can't make all of the sessions, I do encourage you, or anyone you know, to in particular be here on and join us on Thursday, May 19th. And that's because, as I said, this series is based on a DVD series by Sister Helen Craijon. And I'll talk a little bit more about her, but she's internationally known speaker and death penalty critic. She will be with us live on Thursday, May 19th, and we will be submitting questions to her in advance of that time that she will address in her presentation on the 19th. There will also be time for live question and answers after her presentation that night. So over the next 3 weeks of this series, we'll be asking you for any questions that you would like to submit to Sister Craijon. Just type them into the chat anytime, indicate that those are for Sister Craijon, and we'll collect those and make sure we provide those to her in advance. In addition, during the course of this series, at any time during the video or during the discussion, if you have any questions or comments that you would like to make, just type them into the chat room, or the chat box, and we will try to address those questions. If you're asking a factual question, we don't have the answer, we'll get it to you next week. So please be sure to feel free to type in any questions you might have. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Sister Craijon, because we're going to see the video of her in just a minute. Sister Helen Craijon is known around the world for her tireless work against the death penalty. She has been instrumental in sparking national dialogue on capital punishment and in shaping the Catholic Church's vigorous opposition to all executions. Born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in the 1930s, Sister Helen grew up in the segregated Jim Crow South. At the age of 18, she joined the Sisters of St. Joseph. She worked as a high school teacher and religious education director in New Orleans before moving into the St. Thomas Housing Project in the early 1980s. In 1982, Sister Helen began corresponding with Patrick Saunier, who had been sentenced to death for the murder of 2 teenagers. 2 years later, when Patrick Saunier was put to death in the electric chair, Sister Helen was there to witness his execution. In the following months, she became spiritual advisor to another death row inmate, Robert Lee Willie, who was to meet the same fate as Saunier. After witnessing these executions, Sister Helen realized that this lethal ritual would remain unchallenged unless its secrecy was stripped away. And so she sat down and wrote a book, Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States. That book ignited a national debate on capital punishment and spawned an Academy Award-winning movie, a play, and an opera. Sister Helen's second book, The Death of Innocence, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions, was published in 2004, and her third book, River of Fire, My Spiritual Journey, was published in August 2019. All of these books of hers are available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other locations. So if you haven't read these, we certainly encourage you to do that. In this series, we will learn about her journey to begin ministering to those in prison, to those on death row, and to the families of victims of those on death row. We will also learn about the Catholic Church's journey on the death penalty. So as we learn about Sister Craijon's journey, we can also think about our own journey regarding the death penalty. What do we believe about the death penalty and capital punishment? Have we always believed this way? Have we been on a journey about the death penalty? And do we know others who are on a journey with their beliefs about the death penalty? In the series, Sister Craijon also mentions President George W. Bush a few times. This series was made in 2007, so it's a few years old now. She mentions President George W. Bush, and in a seemingly partisan or political manner. We do not want this this series, to be partisan or political. And so please remember that those are Sister Craijon's comments, and we're not trying to make this a political or partisan issue here. She also mentions a number of facts and figures and statistics in the course of her video series. As again, these are 15 years old or so. So where it's been appropriate, we've tried to update that information, and so the updated on those statistics are included in the fact sheet that I mentioned to you a minute ago. As we begin this video, which will begin in just a moment, I hope you have a pencil and a piece of paper available, because what I want you to do while you're watching the video is, if any word or idea or thought strikes you, challenges you, is something new, something that catches your eye as you are watching this video, I want you to jot that down, because at the end of the video, I'm going to ask people to share, what is one thing that really caught you, that seemed important to you, or new, or challenging, or you want to be able to discuss. So, like I said, at the end of the video, we'll all have a chance to do that and share that thing, one thing that really struck out to us. So let me go ahead and begin the video by sharing my screen.
When you hear the death penalty, if you find yourself struggling with it, because maybe you just heard about a mother in a car with her children, she's carjacked, and these thugs kill her mercilessly, and the children. Or you hear about an older couple in their home killed. Or you hear about something that someone like Timothy McVeigh did, setting off a bomb that killed 168 human beings. And if you ever go to the memorial in Oklahoma City, and you see, and you go, it gives the exact time the bomb went off. It reminded me of being in Hiroshima. And then you go through this gate, and there's a reflecting pool, and then to the right are 168 empty chairs. And the children who were killed, little chairs. And the name of the human being who'd been ripped out of life. And when we're in the presence of this, we feel outrage in our hearts that innocent life should be so violated, that older people were subjected to such a death, or children who haven't lived are subjected to such a death. And if you find that yourself experiencing that outrage, I just want to say to you that everybody struggles with this issue, because we all feel that outrage, because we've been made unique and irreplaceable, and when a human life has been taken from us, especially in a violent way, it outrages us. And if we find ourselves then thinking it's just not right that these people should be dead and that they should be alive, even if they're in prison, it's just not fair. This breach has been crossed. And why should we have to talk about respecting their human rights? They didn't respect the human rights of their victims. I mean, and they'll be on death row, and they'll have a spiritual advisor. They'll have a chance to get straight before they meet God. The poor victims didn't have that. It's not fair. It's not right. There's death and there's life. There's a part of us that argues they deserve to die. And that is the journey that we're on with the death penalty. And you know, William Faulkner, when he got the Nobel Prize for Literature, He said the only thing worth writing about is the conflict in the human heart. And the death penalty is one of those issues that we struggle with. And you could be hearing this talk tonight by that fiery, dynamic little Southern nun, and then tomorrow, and you'd be all straight on the death penalty. I know what I think. And then tomorrow morning, you could read about a crime again, and you got to go through the journey all over again. And I just want to say it's morally legitimate because we should be outraged when human life is violated. But then when we say they deserve to die, then we got to start looking at who deserves to kill them. Who will be the agents now? Who will be the arbiters of life and death? Who will decide who dies, who lives? And then you come to something like the Supreme Court, and then you come to legislators who have the statute in Arizona of which people deserve to die. Or another way of putting it, what are the aggravating circumstances under which a person should die? And it may not be as clear-cut as it seems. You can kind of say, well, we know it when we see it. Clearly, Timothy McVeigh ought to die. Well, what about Virginia Smith's killers? She was a young 14-year-old girl brought into the woods near Shreveport, Louisiana, by 3 young men. And she was brutally raped, and her throat was slit, and she was left to bleed to death in the woods. Should we kill those 3 young men? Doesn't that seem the worst of the worst? And that, by the way, is what the Supreme Court has told us is our criterion. And this is what led us into the swamp. Because they said for the worst of the worst murders, not ordinary murders. Think of it. Well, you know, my brother was killed, but, you know, it was a run-of-the-mill garden variety ordinary murder. Every time a human being is ripped out of the fabric of life, it's the worst of the worst, because the universe has been taken from us that can never be replaced. And so what states do, your state, Arizona, my state, Louisiana, every state, they're trying to follow this norm. So worst of the worst, we're going to put aggravating circumstances on it. It's going to make it the worst of the worst. So you know what they do? They take a great big old bushel, right, a bushel, and they fill it with adjectives, and they throw it at the statute. So they say heinous, cruel, intentional. So the death of Virginia Smith, can anything be worse than taking a 14-year-old girl and taking her in the woods and killing her? And then we come to practice. How do we apply the standards? Young Virginia Smith was a young African-American woman, and the 3 kids who killed her were white, and that one of them's daddy knew the DA in Shreveport. They never even got life sentences, much less a death sentence. We don't have a way to apply it. It's a godlike quality we're asking of ourselves, where we're going to have absolute truth, and we're going to be able to apply this standard that the court's given us, the worst of the worst. And now that we got 30 years of practice under our belt, the Supreme Court put the death penalty back in 1976, which incidentally, Canada, at the same time, they passed legislation to do away with the death penalty. So they began to go down the life road without the death penalty. We began to go down the death road with the death penalty. They had a murder rate that had been rising. It evened off, and now it's gone down. They knew, their leaders knew, that 70% of the Canadian public, if you ask people, are you for the death penalty? Most people will say, and they'll think of that worst, that terrible crime, yeah, in some instances, I'm for the death penalty, but for the worst of the worst. And the Canadian people were saying the same thing, but the leadership of Canada had the sense and wisdom to know not to go down that road. We started going down the road. And we have since killed over 1,000 people. But you know what? You'll never see it. It's almost like a secret ritual. If we had let that happen cumulatively, taken 1,000 people, put them in Yankee Stadium, and then just got rifle squads and shot every one of those people, and it had been over TV, we'd end the death penalty tomorrow morning in the United States. But it's in death chambers behind prison walls with a few select witnesses. And in our practice of the death penalty, it's supposed to be worst of the worst, but the practice tells us everything. Who have we actually killed, And let's see which murders in actuality ended up being the worst of the worst. Some statistics. 87% of the 1,000+ people who have been killed for their crimes killed white people. And victims of homicide in this country, over 50% of them are people of color. Young Virginia Smith was a person of color. She was killed, death penalty not sought for her. In New Orleans, before Katrina, 90% of all the murder victims, people killed, were African American people. Death penalty seldom sought for people of color. Hispanic people killed, seldom sought. Native American people, death penalty seldom sought. White people sought. What does that tell us? And when I did have a chance to have a dialogue with Pope John Paul on the death penalty, that was one of the things I said. I said, Your Holiness, for a country to say that they can handle the death penalty, it means they would have to value each of their citizens' lives equally to be this arbiter of life and death. That we're going to be as outraged over the death of a Hispanic person or a Native American person on a reservation or an African American person as we are over someone who's a white person. And, you know, some people say we don't have color in this country, you know, slavery's long over. Boy, if there's anything we see, and I show this in my second book, The Death of Innocence, if there's anything we see in the application of the ultimate penalty and the racism that's in it, is the legacy of slavery. The southern states are the real practitioners of the death penalty. Y'all do it sometimes here, and you got more people on death row than we do. But boy, the 10 southern states that practice slavery have done over 80% of the actual executions, and less than 1% of them are done in the Northeast. And everybody's got the same guidelines and the same Constitution. But practice, boy, oh boy, is the practice ever different. How do we explain regional disparity where you have 80% of actual executions in one part of the country and you got less than 1% in another? We got different constitutions. Does Texas have its own constitution? I mean, yeah, it does. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was just doing an interview, and they were saying, why does Texas have so many death penalties? Look at Texas. Well, first of all, they have a long history of violence. How did we even get Texas? We got it with a gun. We took it from Mexico, okay? Long history of violence, and boy, you look at the Texas death penalty record. And Governor George Bush, who claims he's a pro-life person, he presided over 152 executions, one of whom was Carla Faye Tucker. I have a picture. You know, I had to haul all the stuff out after Katrina, and one of them is a huge picture of Carla Faye Tucker and I hugging each other. And she, you know, she was the woman executed in Texas. She had done an unspeakable crime. I mean, she killed 2 people with a pickaxe when she was high on drugs. And later, she bragged about it to people, saying it made her sexually high. I mean, it can't get worse than this, can it? But here goes Carla Faye Tucker to death row in Texas. And I love this part of the story. She couldn't come to the Franciscan Renewal Center, but she stole a Bible. She said, I didn't know they gave them for free. But she takes this Bible and she begins to read in the epistles of Paul that in Christ we can be a new creation. And her good friend Pam, who was the one who called me to come meet the women on death row, which is where I took that picture with Carla Faye Tucker, said, boy, did she need conversion to Christ. She was a bitch. She said, none of us could talk to her, and she was snooty and all, just hanging out in her cell, and she would just, everything would say, she'd jump down our throat. We were glad she got converted to Christ, because it was easier on all of us, you know. It was the change in Carla Faye Tucker real, or is this what you call jailhouse religion? I'm about to be condemned to death, so hey, I got religion. Was it real? Well, by the time I visited, those 7 women on death row, we sat around a table in the library, and they all had Bibles. And see, for 7 years, I was the director of religious education in St. Francis Cabrini Parish, and I think of all those adult education classes we had where we would study in the scriptures. And boy, do we ever, this is a little aside, but boy, do we ever need religious education in this country. I don't know if you read Bill McKibben's article in Harper's, but I mean, this statistic blows you away. 21% of the American people identified Joan of Arc as Noah's wife. I mean, that's bad. We need to have Franciscan renewal centers all over this country. We need to be standing on corners with Bibles and saying, hey, come in for a little. You know, almost as good as the kid on the Bible test who had to identify Lot's wife. You know, she turned back to see Sodom and Gomorrah, and she turned into salt, and the kid identified her as she was a pillar of salt by day and a pillar of fire by night. We're back to Carl Faye Tucker. And the women all sitting around with their Bibles, and we shared our faith. And how many living rooms had I sat in St. Francis Cabrini with people just like you, people using Scripture and sharing our faith. And the inmates, the prisoners who had been with Carla Faye, the warden who had been with Carla Faye, everyone testified to the change that happened in Carla Faye Tucker. And here's Governor Bush, and he's just made his bid for the presidency. Compassionate conservative, born-again Christian. And here's this woman, and she was on Larry King Live. I don't know what we're going to say when Larry King dies, but Larry King, and we only know him as Larry King Live, so I think, however. But you see, it's easy to kill a monster, and we don't see the execution. It's very hard to kill a real human being. And Carla Faye Tucker, if you ever saw a picture of her, she was beautiful. She had long, dark, curly black hair, and she was utterly transparent and sincere. You can see it in her face, in her eyes. And so she's in Larry King, and she's in the living room all across America. And he had her on for 2 sessions. So people met her as a person, and they heard her story. Yes, she said, I did that terrible crime. And then you began to hear the story of Carla Faye Tucker. That when she was 12, her older sisters introduced her to drugs. That their mother and father had split up. So she started getting on drugs when she was 12. And the kids kind of had to fend for themselves, and she was a prostitute by the time she was 14. And so then she followed that life of drugs, prostitution, and then she was always hooking up with men on motorcycles and being in violence. And one night, she went because she was angry at her ex-boyfriend. And so they break into his place, and at first it was going to be just to steal his motorcycle, and then they're all hopped up with drugs. Next thing you know, in the cellar, here's a pickaxe. Let's go up and let's get him. He's in bed with this woman, and they are killed in their bed. And she says, I did that terrible crime. And I'm not giving this an excuse, but she said, when you're on drugs, boy, you are just going, and I was, you know, and I killed them. And she said, but if, and Larry King says, if you had to ask Governor Bush to spare your life, what would you ask him? And she said, and she looked out at us, the people really, she said, I would just ask Governor Bush that if he spares my life, I'll spend the rest of my life, I know I'll never get out of prison, I'll spend the rest of my life ministering to my fellow prisoners and witnessing to them about what Jesus has done in my life. Now, what is Governor Bush going to do? Because if he did that, he's going to change the criteria. He's going to say, well, Carla Faye Tucker changed her life. And then you'd be looking at redemption and a person showing signs of a changed and transformed life. that then could be matter to commute a sentence. And he goes, then what would I get in? All these born-again Christians will start popping out on death row, and they all going to claim, I've been changed. What would I do? I can't change the criteria. And he's hearing from Pope John Paul. He's hearing from Mother Teresa. He's hearing from the Dalai Lama. He's hearing from people from all over the world. Don't kill Carla Faye Tucker. If you ever go to Belgium, they have a commemorative stamp of her standing by the gurney. And what is he to do? And he said, well, I have to keep the same criterion for everyone I have prayed over this, he said. And so Carla Faye Tucker gets justice just like everyone else. I met with the women, and it was Pam, Carla's friend, who had written me the letter to ask me to please come see them. And she said, really, I'm the one who needs to see you because I'm so scared they're going to kill Carla. And she's really my good friend. I think she's going to be all right because she's approaching death as a way of being with God. But I'm not going to be all right. And I hate to lose her. Would you come and then would you talk to us? So after I was with all the women in that little Bible discussion we had where we're talking about our lives, we go to the back of the chapel. And Carla was not afraid of death. She was going to go to her death, and she was so prayerful. She was so transparent with God's grace. I mean, you can't fake that. And the only thing she was anxious about was that when the guards were going to take her to the Walls unit, which is to drive her to Huntsville, which is several hours, she was going to be alone with the guards in the van. And she said the last time, once when I had a close call, and she has very sensitive intestines, and she said they wouldn't let me go to the bathroom. They made me beg to go to the bathroom, and I'm so scared they're not going to let me go to the bathroom. It was a little point, or a big point, of just human dignity. Facing death, getting up on the gurney, saying her prayer, and turning her life over to God, she can do. And you know, and I remembered studying about St. Ignatius of Antioch, and he was being brought to the Roman Colosseum, and when they got him out of the carriage, they, kind of pulled him out, and it noted he hit his shin on the side of the carriage. He was rubbing his shin. They have this in the lives of the saints. I mean, he's about to be torn apart by lions, and they putting in that he bumps his shin on the carriage, that little human thing. And that's what I thought of when Carla Faye Tucker said that. And in the end, they killed Carla Faye Tucker. You can read an account of her execution, and she turned her life over to God, and the warden, the woman warden, was there with her. And afterwards, they moved that warden because they don't want women getting involved with the women prisoners. They don't want too much compassion. You're not going to be able to do your job. I mean, you're going to have to go and you're going to have to turn these people over to execution. And I was on Larry King after the execution of Carla Faye. He had different people around the United States responding. And the part where I had to pray for the most control was that afterwards, they played again the press conference or the statement that Governor Bush said. Well, I prayed too, he said about this. And he said, now this is after Carla's execution, God bless Carla Faye Tucker. And Larry King came right to me. I never prayed for so much self-control in all my life. I was just to use, I said, I prayed to the Holy Spirit. I just said, God, please help me. This is worldwide, and you don't want to say something off the top of your head and what you want to say, the names you'd want to say, or. And I said, isn't it interesting when Governor Bush invokes the name of God? He's asking God to bless Carla Faye Tucker. He just had Carla Faye Tucker's life in his hands. And now he's saying, God bless Carla Faye Tucker. He didn't bless Carla Faye Tucker. He just had her killed.
I tell you, I've seen that video several times, and each and every time I watch it, I see something new, something new strikes me. I get a new insight, a new challenge, a new idea. So it's really a deep and moving video. What I hope you've had a chance to do as you watch the video is to, identify a word or two, or an idea, or something that challenges you or interests you, or that really stood out to you. And so I'm asking people to please share what you would, any word or idea or challenge from the video, and why that was meaningful to you.
That to me was a very powerful video. But what struck me above all was when Sister said, "Who will decide who lives or dies? Who has God given the right to decide that?" Because as humans, we brought nobody into this world. And I really believe we don't have the right to take anybody out of this world. So that was very heartwarming to hear her say that.
Great, thank you. Who will decide? Who gets to decide who lives and dies? Yeah, powerful question.
One of the things that struck me was her mention that at the same time Canada was doing away with the death penalty, the United States was picking it up again, going forward.
Yeah. Wasn't that an interesting diversion? Canada goes one way and the United States goes completely different direction in that regard. Thank you. Judith.
Yes, I was struck with how do we apply the standards? And we know quite well, as Sister Craijon pointed out, that those standards are not kept across the line. We know that white victims' crimes are more prosecuted, that Black or people of color crimes of those are not. We also know that if the perpetrator is a person of color, those have more stringent sentences. So that always strikes me.
Yes, thank you. Those statistics that she recited, they're just a little bit out of date. They're from about 15 years ago or so, but they're still very close to the statistics that she quoted. And Judith, you're exactly right about kind of the disparity of the application of the death penalty in terms of who is having the death penalty applied to them, and who are the victims of those people. So it's really a really striking statistics. Thank you.
When she talked about not fair in the death penalty, that's one thing, but we can't even figure out how to be fair in little things. How would we be able to take care of something like this? It was just and who's fair and who's the judge of fair? And so that's what caught me. And that was at the very beginning. And I thought, oh dear, already.
Yeah, right. And she's right out of the gate. There are some really tough issues that we're hit with from her. And it just goes on and on. So as I said, each time I watch it, I get more, and I see more and more of those issues. But yeah, the question of fairness, who gets to make the decisions? How are we fair? How do we be fair to everyone involved? Really, really tough questions.
There's a lot that's every time, it's like you said, every time you watch it, you catch something more. She's just so amazing. But tonight, I was thinking about when she talked about if we put the 1,000 people that we've executed, if we put them in a stadium and if we just shot them all at once, imagine the uprising in this country, or like if another country did that, which countries have, maybe not 1,000 outlets, maybe more, maybe less, but we would call it barbaric. Think of all the adjectives that we would use, to describe such a thing. Excuse me. And the fact is, that's exactly what we've done. But it's like she said, we've done it almost in secret. And that was just, it's so startling to think how we compartmentalize, well, maybe everything these days. And that really struck me tonight. There were several things that really struck me, but that was a big one. And then just as another point of information, Mr. Dixon, who will likely be executed on May 11th, he's Native American. And so going to the point, person of color disparity in the death penalty, Arizona has approximately 25% of the death penalty cases of Native Americans in this country. We're number 3, only being outdone by California and North Carolina.
That is an interesting question. If all of this was done out in broad daylight, with everybody seeing exactly what's going on, how would that affect society to see, oh, this is what we're doing? And especially in Arizona, where the reason the death penalty hasn't been carried out over the past several years is because of the difficulties in administering lethal injections. What happens if people were actually to see what it actually looks like? How would that affect the public? Great questions. Thank you. Jim?
I'm always struck by the fact that 80% or thereabouts of the executions in the country are carried out in 10 southern states, which points out the racial disparity in this particular, I call it a heinous crime itself, and violence as being, the basis. We seem to need to be violent in our treatment of making things fair, and that violence seems to increase when the skin color changes from white to something else. That's the part that bothered me, and that's the part that stuck out most for me. So.
Thank you. That's a really powerful point, that the government, in order to be fair to the victims for the violence that was done to them, also acts in violence. And is that a fairness there? Thank you.
What I thought was a very profound point that she made was in regards to, she was talking about George W. Bush as a devout evangelical Christian, as a man of faith. And she was talking about how many people might read the story. What was the name of the lady who she was talking about who was going to be executed?
Carla Faye Tucker.
Yeah, Carla Faye Tucker, how she had become a Christian and was committing herself to, because of her faith, using her faith as a way of helping others. And, she was a changed woman and wanted to help others. And how many people might read that and say, oh, you're just saying that and just doing that so that you don't become executed. But I'm also thinking to myself, well, isn't that the point? Like, isn't the point of like our faith as Christians, the redemption, the restoration, the reformation of like people's lives so that they don't continue to live in ways that they once did? And so I thought she was raising an excellent theological hypocrisy point around, if the point of jail, and I've worked with many survivors of sexual violence, and most of their prayers is not necessarily retribution, but that the person who offended them would not do it again, most of their hope was that what happened to them will not happen to someone else. And I was working on the education side, and they were always asked, like, is there education or a class or therapy or counseling that the offender could do so that they would not repeat what they did to another person? And so if we're finding that that she talked about the criteria, if we're finding that the criteria can be changed in a way to where people see that if I change my ways, if my thought patterns change, if my behavior changes, my relationship to others change in ways that are more fruitful, in ways that are more honoring of community, that spares me from the death penalty, then my God, is that not the point? Is that not the whole point and purpose of why they're in jail anyway? But I think I'm being a bit idealistic here, because if you don't view them as humans by virtue of their behavior, then of course it's not the point for them to be reformed. It's for them to die. And so she just so poignantly made that, raised that when she said the criteria needs to change.
Great, powerful point. Thank you very much.
I was just curious, how many states still have the death penalty? And just to make another point that she made that struck me was the strong ambivalence of the feelings you get when you hear that there's been a tragic, horrendous death of somebody, and then they finally catch the perpetrator, and it's like, yes, you want them to suffer, and but I've never been able to go as far as saying that myself or anyone else has the right to tell them that, oh, you're gonna die because of what you did. I don't feel I'm able to, I'm not in any position to render that decision. That's not up to me. But I certainly appreciated the fact that she acknowledged the fact that you do have those extreme ambivalent feelings.
Yeah, and that's exactly the journey that she's talking about those feelings for, at the hearing or experiencing or becoming aware of a violent action. For some, it's ambivalent feelings. For some, it's anger and wanting retribution or wanting death or whatever. And then the journey from those initial feelings to somewhere else. And where do we end up on that journey with our feelings of the death penalty? So, but yeah, she absolutely acknowledges it's natural to have those intense feelings initially. And to answer your question about how many states still have the death penalty, Billy was kind enough to answer that, and there are 27 states that still have the death penalty.
I think one of the terms that struck me was the term conflict in the heart. I thought of conflict in my gut. I thought of conflict in my head. And sometimes we think those terms are so synonymous when in reality they're so different and can lead us down a different path.
Yeah, absolutely. And the comment that she made that William Faulkner said that conflicts in it was in reference to what you said about William Faulkner, that conflicts in the human heart is the only thing worth writing about. And yeah, that was one of the very first things that caught me the first time I viewed this was the same question that you had. What are the conflicts in the human heart, and how different are they from other conflicts that we might have? Really, really good question. Thank you all for sharing so much. Those are everybody that I see who has raised a hand and wanted to share something with all of us. So to me, that's just a really powerful video. Believe it or not, the other videos in this series are equally powerful. So I hope you'll stay with us and learn more, and for me to be challenged more and walk down the journey, and the different branches and different people who are involved in the death penalty. And one of the things that we really see with Sister Craijon is her concern for the victims and her journey to acting that out, dealing with the victims' families as well. So she shares her journey with us. So it's not like, we're kind of alone on trying to figure out where we are with the death penalty. She has walked that road and shares that with us, not only with her own heart, but also with the Catholic Church. And she talks about having been in dialogue with Pope John Paul II on the Catholic Church's view of death penalty. So I hope you stay with it. Again, in particular, May 19th, Sister Craijon will be with us live. So if you have any questions that you'd like to have presented to her, be sure and let us know. You can email them to me. You can, next week, you can put them in the chat column, and we'll send those to her. One last comment that I want to make about tonight's session. Sister Craijon says that we are on a journey with the death penalty. So, I encourage you to perhaps keep a journal or a notebook about your journey during this series. You could start today writing about your thoughts of the death penalty and victims and those who commit horrendous crimes. Then throughout the series, continue writing about your thoughts and feelings about the death penalty so that you can see how your journey goes. And this is not for sharing unless you want to, but really for you to be aware and thoughtful of your own journey. Remember, take a look at the fact sheet that's posted on the conference website. It's got more information there. Let's go ahead and close with prayer. Gracious God, we are grateful for this opportunity to be together with each other, to be challenged with many questions about the death penalty, capital punishment, who can make those decisions, how is it applied, and how does it challenge us? How do we deal with the feelings that we have when we first become aware of violent actions and death? And so we ask that you continue to be with us on this journey and guide us back here again next week to continue our discussion. We ask us all in Jesus' name. Amen.